Hey, Scott Zambucci here. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Zambucci. Except today, we're not going to talk sales. Today, we are going to have an uncomfortable conversation. And that uncomfortable conversation is going to be around the topic of racism, anti-blackness, and how people like you and me, and I say you and me because I know from my own analysis over the last couple of weeks that you and I are probably pretty similar, meaning that I'm a 46-year-old white guy in Silicon Valley. So, and my entire life basically been living in one track of society that may have had some exposure to other ethnic groups, racial groups, people of color, but really never really understanding what is happening or what has been happening now for decades until the last couple of weeks. And so the purpose of this episode is really, really simple. The purpose of this is for me to share with you what I am doing personally, so that it may give you some ideas. It may help you with some resources that I've been discovering myself and sharing with other people. I am absolutely not, obviously, an expert in everything that's happening right now in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the protests and all of the activity. Using that word, probably not the best word, activity, the movement that's out there. So I don't have the answers for sure. And this is the last thing I want you to get from this episode is the sense that this is some kind of statement or proclamation or me telling you what to do. This is not it at all. What I've been doing for myself over the last couple of weeks is getting educated, and I hope you have too, about what is the real reason for these movements that we're seeing. And I've been learning about terms and phrases like structural racism, anti-blackness, white supremacy. These are terms that I didn't even really knew existed. I mean, certainly white supremacy is a word or a phrase you hear a lot. But for me anyway, when I hear that phrase, white supremacy, I think about a white supremacist, some kind of neo-Nazi group, or some person that has a white hood from the KKK, or somebody in the backwoods of whatever state, with a rifle doing some kind of anti-protest rally against, blacks or people of color. And those people are certainly white supremacists, but white supremacy is actually something totally different that I'm just now learning about. And so as part of that education and part of that journey, I've been spending time on webinars and online events, reading articles, going to people that I know and trust, members of the Black community that have been helping me to create more awareness. And through that awareness, it's enabled me to do some personal analysis so that I can take an appropriate action for myself, for my family, for my team, for my clients. And through that influence, through that platform, starting with myself and working outward, that we can all take an active role in making the changes that need to be happening. And so, so I've got a couple of notes here that I put together in an Evernote file. I'm just going to sort of use this as a backdrop, just to make sure that I'm sharing as much as I can about this personal journey that I'm going through. And hopefully, it's not scripted by any stretch, but I do want to make sure there's certain topics that I want to get to. So, one of the resources, by the way, and all of the resources or people that I mentioned, I'll make sure to put into the show notes. That I would, whether you listen to another minute of this particular episode or not, if you go to a website of a woman named Barbara J. Love, barbarajlove.com, on her website, I learned this through one of the town halls that I attended. She's got what she calls a liberatory consciousness framework. And it's really just 4 steps. Step 1, awareness. Step 2, analysis. Step 3, accountability. Step 4, action and allyship. And so for me, I've certainly been on the front end of this curve, understanding, like, creating awareness over these first couple of weeks, now doing some analysis and moving into accountability and action. And so it's been a very useful backdrop for me to figure out what I should be doing and, frankly, what I shouldn't be doing right now. Because if you're like me, you're an entrepreneur, you want to take action. There's a tendency to sort of move quickly when you see any sort of opportunity to help people in a marketplace, or you see, take, for example, COVID. COVID happened. It's an exogenous shock to the system, and all of us took action immediately, right? Because we had to. That's a tendency for all of us. And one of the things I learned quickly in this movement is to be careful not to rush too quickly into actions that are either not really effective and not sustainable, because this problem that we have is hundreds of years old, and it's not going to be solved with, attending one protest or donating one check or hosting one workshop. The change that needs to happen needs to be sustainable. If you know me and you've listened to my podcast, for example, that I do ultra marathons, right? And there's a pace at which you have to run that race. If you're running 100 miles or 200 miles, you can't run out of the starting gate at, a sprint, because that's not a sustainable pace. You will wear out and you will not make it to the finish line. And so that pace, you have to pace yourself and think about what is sustainable so that I can get to the end of this finish line. And for all of us right now, we are starting this ultra marathon of combating and breaking down the barriers of structural racism and white supremacy and anti-blackness in our society. And so what I like to do is sort of go through and get very personal with you about my personal journey, starting from when I was a kid, because this kind of analysis that I've been doing has been, like, partly embarrassing to realize how blind I was to what's been happening around me for the last 46 years, and also really enlightening in a good way. It's been educational. So I'm going to sort of walk you through my personal analysis, because I think there's probably episodes and experiences and environments that I've been personally in over my last 4.5 decades that are probably in some way similar to yours. And I think if you maybe walk along with me as I go through this and think about yourself growing up, your elementary school, high school, college experiences, and even your work life experiences, that you can find some parallels, so that maybe it will help you with your analysis, and then together we can take the right action. So let's dive in. Thanks for listening. So the first thing I would like, when I've been doing this analysis, the first thing I did was look at, where did I grow up? I grew up in South Jersey, Southern New Jersey, very rural, outside of sort of Philadelphia suburb. People think of New Jersey as a New York suburb. Half of New Jersey is a New York suburb. Half of New Jersey is a Philadelphia suburb. And one of the things that, as I look back, I realized that I grew up in a society there in South Jersey back in, I was born 1974. So think about my growing up years in the 80s, roughly, right? Turned 6 years old in 1980. That's when you sort of like develop some consciousness about the outside world. You start going to school, you start mixing with other groups outside of your family, and you become more aware of what's going on around you. And one of the things that, when I look at my childhood, even at a young age, I realize that you don't have to be from Alabama or Mississippi or the South to realize, like, there's racism here, right? And so for me, growing up, as examples, ethnic jokes were pretty common in not my house necessarily, but certainly family gatherings, group settings. So like ethnic jokes, meaning, the popular jokes when I was a kid were things like jokes about Polish people, and the stereotype is Polacks are stupid, right? Polak does this. There's a Polak, a German, and a Jew. They all walk into a bar, right? Those are, you've probably heard this joke, like whatever joke, insert the rest of the joke. You've heard some combination of that. So Polacks are stupid. Germans are evil. Italians are criminals. Black people are thieves. All Latinos. When I was growing up, there was no phrase for Latino. Everybody that was of Latin descent in the world I grew up in, they were just known as the Puerto Ricans, right? Right. Now this is uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable for me to talk about this. It's probably uncomfortable for you to hear it. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? The racial jokes, especially around Black people, things like, "Hey, what does talking about cars? What does Pontiac stand for?" Pontiac means poor old nigger thinks it's a Cadillac. Or BMW, black man's wish. These are jokes that were told to me when I was 8 years old, by uncles, for example. When I got a little bit older in high school, you go golfing with, a group of, with my dad and some of his friends, right? And you're on a tee box, right? There's nobody within a quarter mile of you, but somewhere around the 9th hole or the 11th hole, everybody's kind of, feeling more comfortable with each other. And then, it's like, people start whispering. They start whispering because they want to like talk quietly, because I want to say, "Hey, a Polak, a Jew, and a German all walk into a bar." Like, so people know it's wrong, but haha, it's funny. Except it's not funny. Like, and then when I look back, because all it does is it starts burning the concept of stereotypes, whether it's Blacks or Jews or Polacks or Latinos, right? So this is the world I grew up in. And this is where it starts to get, this is where the concept of structural racism starts to come in. Because even if, for me personally, I'm not, as an 8-year-old going to KKK rallies or, you get what I'm saying here. Like, this is hard, right? But it's getting burned in, right? And there's a little joke in every joke, but the rest is truth. And so that's kind of this elementary school growing up in South Jersey. In elementary school, in junior high school, there was a mostly racially mixed school. In elementary school, about half white, I'm guessing maybe half Black, because of the neighborhoods. We had 4 elementary schools in our town. I went to elementary school number 3, and it was in a town called Sicklerville, New Jersey. Sicklerville was mostly Black. I lived in a little outside a town right next to it, where it's, subdivisions, mostly white. So Sicklerville was lots of townhomes, and the Black people, the Black community lived there. They would walk to the school, and then we would get bussed in, and it was just because of where we lived. But there was still a racial divide back then, right? Even though you're kids at 8, 9, 10 years old, you play together, but it's more like you play together in sports. That's where there's intermixing, because everybody wants to play kickball or soccer or baseball, whatever that is. But there's still a racial divide on the playground for the most part. If it's free play, right? It's not an organized game of some kind. The Blacks would stay with the Blacks, the white would stay with the whites, and that was just it, right? There were no Asians, there were no Indians, there weren't any, very few Latinos, for example. Junior high, also very mixed. Blacks stay with Blacks, whites stay with whites. Gym class, you'd mix together because you had to. But other than that, is a pretty clear racial divide. Never really any kind of, racial tensions. It wasn't like all of a sudden there's this big fight between the whites and the Blacks, but you could feel the tension, right? Because they were Black and we were white, or we were white and they were Black, right? So that's just sort of foundation, right? Until I was 14. Now I was 14, and again, I'm only sharing this with you for a couple of reasons. One, it's uncomfortable, and this is why I'm doing it. Number 2, my sense is you're probably a lot like me in some ways. Some of you are listening to this, or you've been on the other side of it. if you are a racial minority or you're a person of color, you've experienced the other side of that, being in a mostly white community. So whether you're Indian or Asian, for example, or Black, listening to this, you've seen the other side of what I'm just describing. You know those jokes are going on. You've heard them from afar when you were a kid, and you knew it wasn't right. But what do you say if you're 10 years old? What do you do? So then when I was 14, my family moved to Florida, down towards the Tampa, St. Pete area. And basically, my parents had lived in New Jersey their whole life. They decided they wanted to try something new. I wanted to get out of where it was cold all the time in the winter. We'd gone to Florida a few times for vacation, and let's move to Florida. So we did, and I was actually pretty excited about it. I was excited about the move. We missed, of course, going to miss my friends and all that stuff. But we moved into an area in Florida, a subdivision neighborhood that was the school district was a brand new school, just had been built, top technology, top everything, in a predominantly white, 95% white district. So there were almost no Black kids in our high school. The only minorities that we had were Vietnamese kids that they would bus in from St. Petersburg. So these kids would be put on a bus 45 minutes to an hour one way. So they would go to our high school. And that was our racial intermingling, right? That was supposed to create diversity. And most of those kids, their English was not very good. I can't imagine what it was like for them getting on a bus every single day, getting up an hour earlier before the rest of us. And so they hang out with their own crowd of kids, right? You're Vietnamese, you don't speak English very well. Who are you going to hang out with? You're going to hang out with other kids you can speak Vietnamese with. So even though there was this attempt for racial mixing, it just, like massive failure. It was a check the box thing. And there's an experience in high school that now when I look back, and this is really important, because I think maybe for you, you've also had a similar experience like this. Maybe not this exact one, but what I was doing when I was thinking about this is imagining, what if I was Black and I did this? What would have been different? And so here's the situation. So in high school, between my junior and senior year, I borrowed my sister's car. My sister had a 1982 Buick Skylark. This thing was a tank. She bought this car for like $1,500. This is in 1992. So it's like a 10-year-old car. I'm driving this 82 Buick Skylark and going down a boulevard. Speed limit is 35. I was going 47, 50, close to 50. Everyone on this road was always speeding. So it's sort of a given that you go a little faster than 35. But happened to be a day there was a cop out. And so I drove by this police officer and I looked at my rearview mirror and I could see him pulling out. Now, I wasn't the only car on the road. There's other cars on the road. And so now I'm thinking to myself, what do I do? Do I pull over? I'm like scared. You get your heart leaps. You're like, oh man, this cop is coming after me, because I knew I was speeding. And so I decided, for whatever reason, I was going to try to elude this police officer. So I take a quick right down this neighborhood street. The boulevard kind of wound through a bigger neighborhood. And so I took a quick right, then took another right to get back to the main boulevard. And I didn't see, when I made the first right and the second right, I didn't see the police officer behind me. I made the third right, getting back to the main boulevard. Guess what? Police officer right behind me. I'm like, oh crap. And so he obviously comes out of the car. He's pissed. He's like, what do you think you're doing? And I said, what do you mean? He said, why were you trying to elude me? And so I was, of course, 17-year-old smart ass kid trying to come up with some excuse. I said, well, I wasn't trying to elude you, officer. I just knew there was a lot of cars on the road. I knew I was speeding, but I wasn't sure if you were pulling out for me or some of the other people around me, because it felt like the flow of traffic was pretty fast. So I wasn't sure if you were following me or somebody else. That's the excuse I gave him. And he said, that's bullshit. You were trying to get away. And of course I was arguing with him a little bit. And, finally he said, license, registration, whatever, give it to him. He comes back, gives me a ticket, gives me a speeding ticket. And he also gave me a citation. and a subpoena to appear in court for a charge of attempting to elude a police officer. So then I had to go to court, a month or two later. Ended up pleading no contest to the charge and paid a fine, and that was it. Basically, slapping the wrist. And now imagine if I was a 17-year-old kid, but I was Black in a 1982 Buick Skylark, and that happened. Because again, mostly white neighborhood, all the towns around us mostly white. The Black community were, a good 20 miles away, 15 or 20 miles away from where we lived. So I could, 5, 6, 7, 8 towns around us were all like ours, So what if I was a 17-year-old Black kid in a 10-year-old car and I'd taken a right and taken another right and tried to get away? How would that have been different? I don't know. You don't know for sure. But I think we can both assume with some level of sufficient probability that the outcome of that would have been far different than here's a citation, here's a subpoena, I'll see you in court in 2 months. That's just the fact. I don't know for sure, but based on everything I've been seeing over the last, as part of this awareness cycle, watching videos of Black kids getting, a jaywalking ticket and getting harassed, like for jaywalking in a town where there's no cars. Like police officers pulling over, oh, you were jaywalking, here's a ticket. Why are you wearing a hoodie? I've seen these videos. What are you guys up to? You have any weapons on you? Like you see, these videos are out there, right? I'm watching these videos the last couple of weeks. And, I wonder if I was Black, what would have been different, right? And so this is the analysis piece that I think is important for all of us. In high school, as I'm dating, right, just like every other normal kid, I tell my mom, hey, I'm going out with friends or going out on a date. And again, like this is where the little joke in every joke, but maybe the rest is truth. My parents say, that's fine. Just don't make sure you don't bring a Black girl home. Ha ha. Right. Now, my parents are not racist people, right? My parents have done a tremendous amount of community work throughout the years. And they've done a tremendous amount of charity work over the years. And they've helped people in different communities throughout the years. But this is ingrained in them. This is the structural piece that I'm talking about, right? Where every joke is a little joke, the rest is truth. And it's ingrained in them because, like, when I was going back to when I was in elementary school, when I was a kid, right? When I would go to visit my grandparents, my mom was mostly Irish, my dad's family mostly Italian. And when my mom and my dad were dating, right, my parents told me about this. Like my grandfather used to say to my mom, why are you dating that dumb Dago? Dago is a derogatory term for Italian. This is like the structural, it goes back, now 100 years, right? Why are you dating that dumb Dago? Right, is what he used to call my dad. And when I used to go visit my grandparents when I was 8 years old, I'd come in their house, and my grandfather would be sitting there, and he would make a joke. He's like, "Hey, Scott, come here. Go in the other room and call your dad a dumb Dago." And I didn't really know what that meant. So I go in and say, "Hey, Dad, Grandpa says you're a dumb Dago." Ha ha ha. Right. But this is the whole point, right? It gets passed on generations. And this is why it's so structural, because it gets burned subconsciously. Even if you are a good person, like I believe I'm a good person. I believe my parents are good people. I don't believe my parents would ever do anything malicious to harm someone or look for ways to prevent members of the Black community or any racial minority from having opportunities. But the problem is, like, this is the structural piece. When you look back, you're like, man, this has been in my life since I was a kid, right? And I don't blame them. I blame that they didn't know what to do. There wasn't this conversation. This was acceptable to have these ethnic and racial stereotypes, right? So in high school, right, I move out. In high school, I go to college in South Carolina. So I'm moving into the next phase. And after spending, 4 years in high school with basically no interaction with any members of the Black community, I go to school in South Carolina. Yeah, Winthrop University. It's a state school in South Carolina. Not a big school, 6,000 total students, but pretty racially mixed. Partially because it's a state school, partially because it's in South Carolina, and so probably like 30%, 40% Black. Maybe not quite that high. I'd have to look at the data, but certainly is a large Black community there relative to what I was experiencing in high school. And so I moved to South Carolina. I didn't know a person at the school except for two people I knew at school that were a year or two older than me, went to high school with me, happened to go to that school on soccer scholarships. So that's how I even knew about the school, but I wasn't really good friends with them. So basically, I go to Winthrop completely on my own. I even packed up the car. My parents didn't even come with me to move in. They're like, pack up the car and I go. And that was just normal. It wasn't that they weren't supportive. It's just I was a very independent person. I'm like, I got this. I'm good. They're like, okay. So I get to South Carolina and I'm feeling pretty lonely, right? I'm in South Carolina and I'm looking for some friends. And so I started hanging out with some fraternity guys because they were, throwing parties at night, during the day, on the weekends. They were sort of like a bunch of the guys in this fraternity. The fraternity is Sigma Alpha Epsilon SAE. So those of you who know SAE, you are familiar with it. It's a fraternity that was founded back in the Deep South in Alabama, back in the 50s. I don't even remember, 1860s, and prided itself on being a Southern fraternity, right? So you know where I'm going with this. Now, most of the guys in that fraternity, a lot of them were like former jocks, like guys that played sports in high school. They played soccer, they played basketball. A couple guys in the fraternity were on the Winthrop teams, golf teams, tennis team, basketball team, baseball team. So it was kind of, for me, I was a pretty sports oriented guy. So it was like kind of a good mix of guys from that standpoint, because I like play flag football or play basketball or play volleyball. There's a beach volleyball court in the backyard. So I'm like, oh, these guys are, these are the kind of guys that I'm like. The only exception, of course, is most of them are from the South. Most of them are from South Carolina or Georgia. And there is this very clear Southern racist, I was going to say undertone, but it's really an overtone, right? In the fraternity house, guys in their bedrooms have Confederate flags, right? There are the word nigger was pretty common, right? Guys would walk into the house and tell the nigger joke or talk about some Black guy that they saw on campus and make a joke about that. There's an event in South Carolina called the Carolina Cup, and it's a horse race, and it's really it's like a mini version of the Kentucky Derby in South Carolina. It's basically just a big drunk fest. Imagine Kentucky Derby and NASCAR put together. And so you show up, party all day, but you show up, you take a bus down there, and it's in a place called Camden. I believe it's in Camden, South Carolina, which is a mostly Black town. And so you get off the bus and everybody has a big cooler of beer. Now, if you ever carried a large cooler of beer filled with ice and water, it's pretty darn heavy. So the kids in that community know it's a great way to make some money. So these 6, 7, 8-year-old Black kids come up to the bus and say, hey, man, carry your cooler. So you pay some 8-year-old Black kid to carry your cooler. And this is the sad part, right? When I look back on this, like and all of us would sort of justify to ourselves and to everyone else, like, oh, we're helping these kids out, right? They're earning money. But really the joke was on that, because it was a way for us to pay $10, but really that payment was giving us permission to feel superior. Like, oh, I'm going to pay this kid, and this 10-year-old kid's going to struggle to carry this big cooler that I can't even carry myself, right? That's overtly racist. And that was a community that I was a part of. So again, I'm simply sharing this because, again, I don't know how overtly or like convertly, maybe your experiences were, but these are experiences, right? In South Carolina, right? There's a Confederate flag. They flew the Confederate flag on the State House until 2015, right? NASCAR just this past week finally said no more Confederate flags. Um, but this is the environment. I had a second episode with the law when I was in South Carolina. Again, imagine same episode, but what if I was black instead of white? Coming home from a bar late one night, walking home, just being obnoxious, not being destructive, but just being too loud, right? It's 2 a.m, whatever time it is. Too much to drink. Was with a friend, fraternity brother, and one of his friends that was underage. And so we're just being a little too loud. So cops come up, as we're walking home. Hey, what's going on here, guys? We're just, having fun coming home. So cop decides to check our IDs and sees that one of them is underage and starts giving the guy a hard time. Oh, you're underage. Where did you get the alcohol? Do you have a fake ID? Like, how did you drink at the bar? Just pushing a little bit. So I was overage. I was 21, and I started snapping at the cop. Just leave him alone. We're not causing any problems. I'm being a smart ass. I push a little too far, and the officer says, all right, step to the rear of the vehicle. And he cuffs me, throws me in the car, and I spent the night in jail. So I deserve that. Maybe not. Probably wasn't the best use of time and resources from a police officer standpoint. But if I was black, what would have been different? And when I look at the video of George Floyd, and I haven't watched the whole video because I can't get myself to stomach it, because I know what I'm going to be seeing, but I've seen the images. It could have been something very different. This is 25 years ago in the middle of South Carolina. So again, I was fortunate that I didn't have, I wasn't black. It could have been a lot worse. So again, I'm just sharing this with you because, I stepped into a world that was overtly racist, but I chose to ignore it. And I never felt like, oh, I'm not racist. And yeah, I'll use the nigger word. It's funny, but we just do it inside the house. So we would never say it out there. Or we would have mixers, parties with other fraternities and sororities. And one of the black fraternities on campus was Kappa Alpha Psi. And we had to do some community work with those guys. And we're like, oh, these are good dudes. Like, these are fun guys. So we had them over to the house. We had a big party. And we would sort of like use that to justify and check the box. Like, oh, see, we're not really racist, right? It's heritage, not hate with the Confederate flag, all that bullshit. But really, I chose to ignore it. I chose to be ignorant, right? So then I move into work life. And this is where you really, when I look back as part of my analysis, you see the actual structural racism. So my first real job out of school, selling college textbooks for Prentice Hall College Publishing, which later became Pearson Education. And so when I look at that education sector, selling to colleges and universities, and I think about who are the professors that are in these different departments that I was selling college textbooks to. So professors in the business department, science department, math department, engineering department. These are all the different departments that I would go on campus and talk to these professors about their textbooks. When I look back and I realize, like, I can't really remember too many black professors in any of these departments. And as just a randomized sample yesterday, I typed in to Google, I typed in math department, LSU, Louisiana State University. I typed in business department, Appalachian State, and I typed in history department, Princeton University. 3 random universities, 3 random departments. And I scrolled through the faculty department of those 3 universities, those 3 departments. If you go and look for yourself, you're going to see what I saw. There are almost no black professors. This is 25 years later. This is 2020. And I'm selling textbooks back in, 1996, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And so this structural racism that appears, and it's not that any of those professors, it's who knows, right, what they're like at home. And nobody was overtly looking to prevent, like, oh, don't hire black people. All of those schools have equal opportunity employment. But the fact is, it's not balanced, right? Later, I went on to work at Altos Research. So I went from Prednisol to first I went to a small startup called Aplia out in Silicon Valley. That's what got me out to California back in 2001, 2002. And um, from there, ended up after a couple of years at Aplia, took a break, went back to graduate school, got a master's degree in economics, and then decided to move back into the startup world after doing some consulting work for a couple of years. And I worked for Altos Research and helped build that company. We were selling mostly to the real estate market, real estate agents, brokers, and also to Wall Street. So people on the trading desk using our data to price mortgage-backed securities or any kind of housing trade, right? So real estate, almost no blacks. There are some ethnic minorities, but typically at those live events, there's no, you go to like a conference and there's like almost no blacks or no minorities. Selling into Wall Street, I mean, there's not even any women in Wall Street, let alone blacks. There's Indian and Asian, right? But you don't see women even. So again, structurally, you realize, wow, these industries, there are very few members of the Black community there. Then from there, I worked at CoreLogic and then eventually at Blend and selling to the mortgage market, mortgage lenders from Wells Fargo down, and I was selling to the government. So at CoreLogic, I did a lot of government selling. Now, government had some diversity because of their equal opportunity initiatives, but even at the upper levels of those government agencies, whether it's HUD or Treasury or any of these, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, at the upper levels, very, very few executives were minorities. So again, you see it structurally in the mortgage market, whether it's Wells Fargo or Bank of America or the credit union down the street. Again, like the whole mortgage market, the joke in technology when it comes to technology is like the mortgage market, this is even 10 years ago, mostly run by 50, 60-year-old white guys in blue suits. And we said that because they didn't understand technology, but now, and that was our perspective on the market. We didn't take the perspective as like, it's run by 50 or 60-year-old white guys in blue suits. Why is that? Why aren't there more blacks? Why aren't there more minorities that are running these companies, right? And even today, you look at some of the recent appointments. So there's a guy named Eric Blankenstein, and I don't know Eric, and this is not meant to point fingers at him or him personally. I don't know the full situation, but he was the chief operating officer of Ginnie Mae, and turns out that in his past blogs, he had racist comments. And after the discovery of this, he later, after leaving Ginnie Mae, was appointed to the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Board. The people that are supposed to be looking at rules and regulations to make sure there is fair lending, to make sure that there is transparency in the lending world. And there is a lot of predatory lending in the US still, even after all of the reforms. There are packages like reverse mortgages. There are other HELOC, home equity lines of credit. And there are still lending practices that are illegal, if not morally irresponsible. So here's a guy who was known to have had racist comments in past blog posts with a previous role, left that role and was rehired into the CFPB. So, and I look at that now, like, first of all, even before the last couple of weeks, you could be like, well, that's wrong. But especially now, like this is one instance, one example. But the fact is, he gets the second chance. It gets ignored or it gets swept under the rug, right? So this is the kind of structural racism, the anti-blackness that I'm now seeing through this awareness. So think about that for whatever industry you're in. Think about the people that you're selling to. Think about the people that go to your conferences.
Go to any conference website for whatever industry, insert industry that you're selling to. Go to look at the speakers. Now, fortunately, there have been more efforts recently to bring in women, to bring in minorities, but still, you just look at the speakers. Look at the people attending the conference. Think about the people you're selling to on the other side of the table. How many times are they guys like me, middle-aged white dudes? Like that's just the structure of the way things are. And so the last thing I'll mention as part of my awareness and analysis here is thinking about hiring and diversity. So at Aplia, I was the head of sales there. At Altos Research, I started off as head of sales, eventually COO. And those are my first like hiring leadership roles. And again, we always were equal opportunity. We would look at every resume, we would consider every candidate, but equal opportunity doesn't mean we put forth equal effort. We didn't post the jobs in places where we could recruit people of color, or members of the Black community. We use the speed excuse, like we got to hire quickly. We'll look at every qualified candidate. But if all those qualified candidates happen to be people that are white, then of course you're going to get people just like you. And we had that at Aplia. We had that at Altos Research. The people on the sales, business development, customer teams were almost all white. We had one Asian guy at Aplia as part of that first team of 8 people. We had 2-3 women. Right? So our CEO, Sally Elliott, woman and lesbian. So kind of like had some diversity, but not real diversity. And then at Altos Research, when I look back at the team I managed, the whole company at one point, again, all white, some women, we used the speed excuse instead of being proactive, right? At CoreLogic, none of the executives were Black, very, very few. If you go to some of their events, so they have an event every year, a user group summit, just look at the banner photo on their website. Who are the people that are there that are attending? Right? Just look at the crowd. It's all white people, right? Now at Blend, that was the first company I worked at that made this a focus. But really then, even only after growing to about 75 or 100 people, where we had more resources, we certainly hired lots of engineers, and a lot of engineers are Asian, Indian descent. So definitely people of color, but not Blacks, right? Certainly now Blend's done much better. And in fact, they're winning awards for their diversity and inclusion measure and work. But, it's something we could have done more of earlier. Right. And that brings me to kind of where we are today. So that's kind of my journey. And I'm only sharing all of these very specific details because I'm hoping that through my awareness and analysis that you might have seen other places just like this for you, so that we can all become more aware of what's going on out there and what we can, and so that we can identify things we can do to make changes. So today at Sales Qualia, I've been running this company as a full-time effort. I've been doing workshops and coaching for almost 5 years before I turned this on to a full-time endeavor. But in the last 5 years, most people I think would look from the outside looking in and say, hey, you're doing a lot of the right things. We've had clients across ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation, geographies. We have clients in India. We've had clients in the Middle East. We have had clients and do have clients in Latin America. We've hired people across those different categories of whatever you want to call it. When we look for Upwork outsource people, we look for women in places like Pakistan that are on Upwork because we know they don't have the same freedoms and opportunities as women in other parts of the world. So we sort of say, hey, we're doing a lot of the right things. But when I do more analysis, if I look at our podcast guests, and I've done that analysis now, and I just look at all the guests we've had, I've never had a member of the Black community. I've done over 100 episodes, probably had at least 60 guests, right? Never once had a Black person, a member of the Black community, right? When I post jobs, again, I'm posting on Upwork, I post on other places. I use a website called the Mom Project to post jobs so that I can give opportunities to women in tech. But again, I've never put the effort to do the outreach to the Black community, right? When I look at our partner programs, accelerators, incubators, international programs, we've worked with people from the Nordic region, companies from France, companies from Turkey, companies from India. So geographically diverse, ethnically diverse. And a lot of those accelerator incubator programs, those are people that have been referred to me or inbound stuff. But if I look and do the analysis and go, why haven't I spent just a little bit of time looking around and saying, what could I be doing better to reach some of the programs that are helping economically disadvantaged people across the US, members of the Black community, whether those are in cities like Detroit or Chicago or other places where there are these programs, and there are programs, like all it took was a simple search. You can find them. You can find the people. There are, even within the venture capital community, there are some VCs that have this effort. There are some VCs that only invest in Black led companies, right? But I never took the effort. I justified like, well, these are the people that we're working with. They're open to all. And hey, I'm working with these teams in Turkey, or I'm working with these teams that are based in India. So I'm doing my part to not be racist, to be equal opportunity, but it's not, right? Of course I would if they would have asked. They didn't ask, so how would I know? And that's the piece. That's what I need to do. And those are opportunities that I'm suggesting that you do as well. So now what? So we've gone through like my awareness and education. So developing that awareness, doing that analysis that I've just done, so you can feel it and see it, right? And then look at, where are you spending your money right now? What companies are you supporting that are Black owned? How are you recruiting for jobs? I just found out about a website called Black Tech Jobs. We're now hiring for a customer success person. I posted on that job board. These are really simple things. Going through LinkedIn and realizing, just looking at my LinkedIn feed, and I see members of the Black community, and I realize like, wow, that person's a first degree connection. That person's a first degree connection. They're in my network. It would have been easy for me to do the outreach had I looked. And then of course, not even first degree, but second degree, I've got 7,000, almost 8,000 LinkedIn connections. I'm second degree connection away from probably 1 million people because of that, literally, right? So it would be easy to get an introduction. It would have been easy for me to find those people. So look for these kinds of actions, right? Have the uncomfortable conversation with your team. We did a group. One of the things we do in our coaching program every month is we do a monthly call with all of the CEOs and founders. And it's a group call. It's a mastermind call where everybody brings a challenge or a question, and then we do group think. The concept is none of us is smarter than all of us. And so, you present your question or challenge to 5 other CEOs in a group, and you're going to get like really great creative ideas to solve the problems that you have. And in our call yesterday, I started the call by asking simply, what things have you been doing, so we can share with each other. Maybe one thing that Andrew is doing with his company would be useful for Jean to hear in his company. And so we just did some sharing, and it was wonderful to hear some of the things that some of the teams have been doing, enabling, like giving their team permission to join protests, matching donations, dollar for dollar, looking for other opportunities to post jobs, do a better job with recruiting. So these are actions that you can take. And think about, we have one of our clients, Andrew, who is donating time for web development projects. And between his time and his employee donated time, they have basically found enough hours to do the equivalent of a $50,000 project. It's a significant project. So they could offer that time to an organization to help promote and make real change. So these are things you can be doing. They don't have to be big changes, but definitely go back and make sure you're aware, first of all, what's going on. Do this analysis, get educated on this thing, all these things that are happening. And so I mentioned Barbara J. Love as a website. I mentioned the town hall. Um, the town hall I attended was hosted by a woman named Rachel Rogers, who is a Black woman who runs a company called Hello 7. Phenomenal person, not just like, not just phenomenal Black woman, just a phenomenal person, an entrepreneur that I've known for a couple of years, and like, look up to her and look to what she's doing with her business so that I can at some point grow into what she is doing. And so she organized this town hall, and she had people like Erica Hines. Her company is called Every Level Leads.com. People like that who you can go to and read and understand what should I be doing? What are the right actions? What are things I shouldn't be doing? How do I take a sustainable action? Something that is not just a one-time donation. It's not just doing a protest. So what are the sustainable things that we can do to break down the structural racism, the anti-blackness, the white supremacy that permeates throughout, our society, whether that's in your industry, with your team, like I said earlier, start with yourself, then work out from there. Yourself, your family, your team, your company, your industry. There's things we can do. Like one of the things I'm doing is making sure I'm bringing this topic up with teams in our coaching calls. And it's not like, hey, what do you like? You need to be doing this. It's just simply having that uncomfortable conversation with them, and just simply asking, are you having the uncomfortable conversation with your team? Are you talking about this? Are you getting educated? Are you looking for ways to take action? Because if not, here are some resources. Here are some things you could be doing. And if we all just do these things, then we can all contribute to the outcome that needs to happen, which is breaking down these walls and giving opportunity to everyone who deserves it. So I've got a lot more links that I can post. I'm sure you may have seen some other articles. There's articles like 75 things white people can do for racial justice. This is a post on Medium from 2017, right? So it's not like a new thing. There's a post that I found on a website called The Root, How to Be a Better White Person in 2020, published in January. So these are not like new posts where people are just like, oh, now that there's all these protests, here's things you should be doing. Like these resources are out there. You just gotta go find them. You just have to look for them, because if you look for them, you're going to find them, right? I found on Crunchbase, there's lists like 39 Black women investors. They're inspiring a new generation of investors. Right? 25 Black entrepreneurs making waves. These are articles on Crunchbase. I'm on Crunchbase almost every day, right? Again, the information's there. I just wasn't looking. And that's where equal opportunity isn't the same as equal effort. So you got to put forth the effort and make sure that effort is real and sustainable and will make an impact. And you don't have to be literally the white knight on the horse. I mean, that was sort of a joke that came in one of the sessions I attended. There's a tendency for us, I'm speaking to you, if you're a white guy like me or a white person like me, to like want to ride in and solve the problem, through here's some money, or let's set up some program, or let's do some workshop and look, we'll fix the problem. It's not about that. It's about creating sustainable, lasting change, right? Doing the right things all of the time and continuing to do the right things, continue to look for opportunities. So that's it. That's, goes back to that model I talked about with Barbara J. Love. Awareness, step 1. Step 2 is analysis. Step 3 is accountability. That's partly why I'm doing this podcast, is not just to share information with you, but also for me internally having accountability to continuing these actions, and then looking for action and allyship. What actions can you take? What allyship can you make with organizations to create real change out there? So I didn't have necessarily a great way to start the podcast. I don't have a great way to end this podcast other than say, well, number 1, thank you. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Number 2, if this has been helpful at all, please let me know. This is time that we're investing, and I want to make sure that we're investing this time doing the right things, and if this is helpful and impactful for you, please let me know, because I can do more of it. I don't want to do something that makes me feel good. Oh, look, I recorded a podcast episode. Isn't that great? I'm addressing the racism situation. Check the box. That's not what this is. But I also don't want to just spend the time if it's not impactful. So if it is useful, if it is impactful, even a small part, please let me know. Leave a comment. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening, leave a comment, send me an email, Scott. My email address is Scott, SCOTT, at Qualia, Qualia.com. If you want, like, I've been keeping an Evernote file of resources and articles and people. If you want me to share that with you, I'd be happy to share it with you. Again, we're all on this journey together. All of us, I think, if you made it this far, you probably want to make a change. If you listen to all this and you're just like, after all of this, not looking for ways to take action or make a change, then I don't know what else to say to you. Then just get the fuck out. Like, I don't know what else I could say. Like, this is not a later problem. This is not something to say, okay, yeah, I'll do that later. But really now I'm right busy with this product launch. I'm really busy trying to raise capital. I'm really busy trying to hire. I'm really busy trying to deal with COVID. I'm really busy trying to figure out sales. But so I'll do it later. It's not a later problem. This is a now problem. Now it's now later. You have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility. I have a responsibility. And that's why I'm doing this, because I want to take my part in this. And I hope that you do too. So, so thanks for listening. Please let me know what else you need, what else I can do to help. Let me know if this is useful. And look for more, for sure. Look for more guests coming up. We're already looking to booking guests that are members of the Black community. And that's been hard, because I want to make sure that the approach to those people, they understand that this is an honest and earnest outreach to these people, not like, oh, we realize we've been screwing up, so we need to check the box. And that's hard. That's the uncomfortable part of this conversation, because there are lots of people, consultants like Erica Hines or Barbara Love, they're probably getting inundated with requests. We want to run a workshop. We want to do better. Teach us how. But how many of those requests are real people that really want lasting change, or how many of those are just people looking to check the box? And it's hard. It's hard to figure out how to do that outreach with people. But we're making that effort, and we will have those guests. We're going to find the right people for the right reasons. And if you have any guests that you can recommend, if you have any other organizations or causes that you want to share, again, share those with me so I can share them with other people. So, all right, that's it. Thanks for listening. This is Scott Sangucci signing off.